Continuing part 3, the story of the scroll, the curve. Fasting and Easter. Esther has had her argumentation with Mordecai, as similarly is the argumentation in man. Man argues with himself. It is the argumentation to a creation. With God, too, there is this argumentation. Will creation come or will it not? Will creation be destroyed or shall it be preserved? It is the outset of the collision of the forces of development with the neshama, with that which is hidden. The crisis is at hand. The outcome of the argumentation is that Esther begs for a fasting for the 3 days, the 13th, 14th, and 15th of Nisan, for her sake. Fasting means turning away from anything in this world that has to do with enjoying development. It is turning into a direction which knows nothing of the pleasure of development. Eating and drinking are the physical expressions of this attitude of life, for eating and drinking are physical development. So fasting essentially goes far beyond this superficial expression. The body, as well as one's whole existence, is now directed differently. It comes under a discipline of another world. This discipline avoids mixing up with the forces of development and thus sets the individual and his existence free for the path of return. It is complete fasting. It is a radical and principled emancipation from the forces of development. The 13th of Nisan is the day when, in Jewish practice of life, all leavened bread is cleared away. Everything is looked into, examined, if anything should have been left as a remainder. The leavened dough is what swells. It is what yeast does with dough. Therefore, it is anything subjected to the forces of development. Bread, wheat, indeed, is the first principle of growth. Hence, clearing away leavened dough means that the individual examines himself and everything that has to do with himself, the place in which he lives, and the things he uses in his life, most conscientiously as regards things leavened, the shemetz, as it is called in Hebrew. He has to emancipate himself from it, not just in broad outline, but on the contrary, in every detail, to be free. The significance of that which is unimportant, inconspicuous, and what the individual who clears away the leavened, the swelling, is sufficiently familiar with. Fasting starts on this 13th of Nisan, the day on which the preparation for Easter, which is on the 15th, becomes a serious affair. For this clearing away of things leavened, of everything subjected to development, is identical with the principle of fasting. In the individual, similarly, is started the clearing away of the forces of development on the 13th of Nisan, when the acme of development is at hand, at least in the individual that cares to learn about the way of the return, in the individual that knows he is going to withdraw more and more from this world of development and to leave in God's hands what is going to happen to the world of the exile. In the evening of the 13th, at the beginning of the 14th of Nisan, all leavened dough that has been found, down to the smallest, most insignificant remainders, is amassed in the conviction that one has actually, putting forward one's strength completely, cleared away anything to be found, that everything is now free from it. Then, in the morning of the 14th of Nisan, all that is leavened is destroyed. One has now completely renounced it. Fasting on this second day reaches its zenith. On the second day of fasting, the 14th of Nisan, the lamb which has been kept in preparation from the 10th day is brought into the house. The body, which previously has taken part in development, is now brought into the house. For the body, it means the way of the return. Now the house is signed with the blood of the lamb. It is identical with the blood of the circumcision. In either case, the covering is taken away and forced back. In either case, the significance of the exterior of the brilliant has been so much pushed back that the very core, the substance, can be free and becomes perceptible as a token. A link with another world has now been made. It is the covenant, the berith. When the 15th day of Nisan begins in the evening, which is also the evening of Easter, the third day of fasting sets in. Easter is essentially a day of fasting. So it is, for all the leavened dough has now been cleared away, and the unleavened bread is now served at the meal. For now the great meal begins, the decisive meal. Now that part of life begins when the critical midway point will have to be passed. This meal is called a lean meal. The bread of poverty is eaten at the time. For it is the unleavened bread, the bread which is completely free from any remaining force of development, however inconspicuous, however unimportant. Fasting has reached its zenith. Now people can eat, but now they eat the unleavened bread. Meanwhile, in the world of development, in the world of the exile, there obtains an enormous confusion. On the one hand, the world seems to approach the zenith with unprecedented speed, and it seems to make ready to break through the zenith, a new world with man as the god of development leading the way. But on the other hand, there are just as many signs of wondering what all this is leading to in the end. Inwardly, there's anxiety too. What will become of man? Leavened bread is a long way off. The lamb is in the house. The man is in the house. Outside, there's the roaring world of development. Out there, God speaks his own language to the world of the exile. Inside the house, where the individual is by himself, now the unleavened bread is eaten. It is the main course of the meal. It is the matzah, as the unleavened bread is called in Hebrew. From the point of view of the world, it is a lean meal, and it is indeed possible here. The way of return seems to be possible yet. Outside, however, the storm of development is raging, acting against nature. In the story of Esther, according to ancient lore, there happens a great deal in the world outside. What happens in the exile has its specific character. In the outside world, on the eve of the 15th of Nisan, on the eve of Easter, in fact, Esther puts on her royal apparel. Ancient lore has it that her garments are the Ruach HaKodesh. At that critical moment, when God's secrecy passes into action, into the phenomenal form, because it is then that both for the world and every individual apart, time is at hand when the return can only be achieved through God's taken action. I repeat, at that critical moment, the form is veiled in the Ruach HaKodesh, in the Holy Ruach. Then the phenomenal forms expresses something new. Words, phrases too, are inspired by God and given to individual man to be spoken and written down. Something new is at hand. Previous to it, Esther had taken off her royal apparel. She too had gone about in sackcloth and ashes. Her appearance was sad, disconsolate, dejected too with fear that the forces of development might prevail. The Hebrew, wrapped in phenomenal forms, felt himself so much in exile that everything about him got tinged with gloom, the other lack of prospect. The 3 days of fasting, however, suddenly bring about a change of aspect. The passivity of secrecy comes to an end. One might put it like this: there is a subterraneous rumbling. Something grand is going to wake up. Man, indeed, through his acting, has definite significance. His reversal of the way, his clearing away things leaven, his meal on the unleavened, bring about forces so far considered incredible. Motion is stirring within Esther, the Nistar. Similarly, does fasting in Nineveh in the story of Jonah bring about a complete revolution. While according to natural law, it is an established fact that Nineveh shall go down, this fixed rule is broken because of the transformation in man's attitude. Nineveh does not go down. This it is that moves Jonah so deeply. God himself tells him, in fact, that Nineveh shall perish, and that he is to tell them about that, or he is to tell them that. Nineveh must fall because it follows the wrong way, the way of development. A bad way is viewed from on high. And no sooner does Nineveh reverse the way and start fasting, hence eliminating all that is leavened, than even the verdict of God on Nineveh is abolished. In that case, Jonah asks, what certainty does exist if all this can happen? God's answer is that the only certainty is in God waiting for man to return, that all creation has been made for that purpose, that the whole structure of word and growth is thus broken up, is of no account in regard to man's marvelous recognition of the possibility of the return, of a different meal, of a meal at which the wine is hallowed. The one certainty is the fact of God's dialogue with man. For man, things depend on this dialogue. All the rest is matter for argumentation. Fasting has a revolutionary effect. Owing to this act of man, a universe is set in motion. This is how Esther comes to the king. She comes without being summoned, and the king starts burning with anger. Constant show of anger in the story of Esther is nothing but the world of exile acting in consequence of perception. This perception is merely aware of the moment. It is ignorant about the cause and effect, for both are nistar. This acting in accordance with this limited knowledge, therefore, has a specific character. And if such acting is directed by supposed knowledge of development and observation is not in conformity with it, then there arises what is called anger. Now, the king is angry because something about him in his immediate neighborhood disregards the natural laws of Porus Humodi. She is a spoil sport, this queen. She makes her appearance when, to all intents and purposes, she should not have appeared at all. Esther perceives the anger and she gets into extreme panic. It is no small matter, indeed, when something is undertaken and people pretend there are no natural laws. When, however, such an undertaking forms part of the fasting, part of the turning away from the world of development, then, wherever people are waiting for the return, for coming home, there will be confusion. Thus, ancient tradition has it that God sees Esther standing there, and there are 3 angels coming to interfere with natural law. It is God's mind which calls up the deed called angel, Malek. For in that world of turning away from development, one is quite close to God. One angel lifts up Esther's neck. Now she is no longer in panic, but full of assurance. Recognition with the other world has come reciprocally. The second angel veils Esther in attractive loveliness, and the third takes hold of the king's golden scepter and stretches it until it touches Esther. Primordial light will break through at such a moment. Nothing that seems fixed proves to have to be fixed. Everything can change in such an encounter. The scepter of 2 cubits becomes 12 cubits. Different opinions, quite right in themselves, mention that the scepter has become 16 or even 24, 60 or even 200 cubits long. Esther is stirred by that primordial light, not owing to Ahasuerus' kindness or grace. For Ahasuerus, these notions do not exist. According to Ahasuerus, Esther should have been annihilated, but at this moment another world breaks through. The very fasting had given admittance to the other world. Man's forsaking the world of development, renouncing that world, opens another world undreamt of. Then the forces of that world interfere, and the scepter of Ahasuerus too changes its nature completely. The scepter was short. Primordial light was allowed to enter. This world of the exile did not know about it, but it is brought into prominence again with immense power. It pervades the world anew, and now Ahasuerus can do nothing else but act accordingly in obedience to this changed world. He too is terribly impressed by the things that happen around him. He too feels a world tottering.